Hi, Gemini. Welcome to your 2025 recording of the year ahead forecast. And I'm so glad you're here with me. I really appreciate your support. If you're here, it's because you've paid to watch me babble on about your sign in 2025. And I really do appreciate that because I don't monetize my channel, as you might know. And your payment towards this is a support psychologically and financially to the work that I do. So I'm really grateful, very glad that you're here with me now. It's going to be quite a year for you. It already starts with a bang with your sign hosting Jupiter until the 9th of June. And so you're already feeling that from late May of 2024. And it's a new momentum for you in 2025 because Jupiter will cover territory that it hasn't yet covered. And you'll feel this forward momentum picking up as of March, April, and May, really accelerating change in your life. And then, of course, we have Uranus going into your sign in July, the 7th of July. And that will also be quite dynamic. It's going to be like if you think of Jupiter preparing the way for you, think of Uranus as Jupiter on steroids going through your first house. And this is for your sun or rising sign or moon sign. So if it's your sun, this will feel like your worldly outlook and your vision for your life, your sense of purpose, maybe your career or your sense of vocation, the reason you get out of bed in the morning, your ikigai. And it can also represent men in your life, your father as well, depending on how aspects affect the sun in the chart. Sometimes that can show up in the lives of the men around you at the time the sun is being affected. And if it's your moon, that can represent the women, especially the elder women, like your mother, motherly figures. And it can also be, of course, your home, but most especially it's your inner home, your psychological self, your mind and the way that you feel and think about your day-to-day life. And so the moon is more internal, but you'll still notice things showing up. You'll still notice that things are shifting for you in your perspective on the outlook, let's say, on your life. And then finally, if it's your ascendant sign, it's all of your life. It's you as you show up in the world and how you feel as you engage in the world. You show up as a Gemini to everybody around you. And that is a part of your change or the places that are going to be affected as far as Gemini is concerned. But it's also your whole life because when the first house is really highlighted, then really all of life is shifting. So there's something really exciting happening for Gemini in 2025. Let me start with sharing some charts. There's a lot of information, and it's going to take us about an hour and a half to get through all of this. So I'm going to be as efficient as possible. But I happen to have Jupiter in Gemini as well, natally, and it's squared by Saturn in Pisces natally, although it's a separating square in my case. And so I might rattle on and I might get a little distracted here and there, and I might forget some dates and things. So just bear with me. You might know what that feels after these last few months of going through this Jupiter square Saturn in yours from your sign into your 10th house. So I've put your sign on the rising sign or the ascendant sign of this chart, and Jupiter, of course, is right there. Now, this is an interesting date. It's not the first day of the year, but it's the 3rd of January, and it's kind of like the big momentum that has picked up from the end of December when we completed the second of the Jupiter square to Saturn, which happened on the 24th and 25th of December from your sign to your 10th house of your career and how you show up. Now we're moving in a slightly different direction because Saturn is starting to go really much more quickly forward, and Jupiter continues its backwards journey. So later on in the year, we're going to see that that square reappears, but no longer from your sign. Now, Jupiter is very important this year, and that means that you're playing a big role this year because as of the 10th of January, Jupiter is going to be ruling the North Node, which will transit that 10th house. So, of course, it's already ruling Neptune and Saturn and Venus, which just moves into your 10th house at the 3rd of January. And so it's going to let's say, expand your role in all of those worldly or social or outer roles and dynamics that you have going on in your life. Now, the other thing that's really important on this particular day, 3rd of January, and by the way, I invite you to look always in this upper left-hand corner And there you'll find the dates and things that are being talked about. So here it's just got the word transit. Sometimes we're going to be looking at that as an ingress, planetary ingress, meaning when the planet moves into a sign, or we're going to be looking at that as an eclipse. And you'll find that information up here if you're in doubt on the video. And what we're looking at here on the 3rd is quite an impactful day. So it's not just that Jupiter and Saturn are sort of it's still in a lingering square, but it's now in a separating square. But it's also the day that Mars opposes Pluto for the second time. So you might recall that on the 4th of November, Mars opposed Pluto from your second house of money and family and everything that supports you, your values and your valuables, the stuff of life, the stuff that you find important. And that has now shifted. And Pluto, by the way, was in your 8th house at that time, back in November. Pluto left your 8th house for the last time on the 19th of November. But this is the second opposition now with Mars going retrograde since the 6th of December. It's now backing up again into the opposition with Pluto moving direct. Later in the year, in April, we're now then going to have a 3-degree opposition, both again from Leo, where Mars is now direct at 3 degrees, and Pluto will be retrograding from 3 degrees. So this area of your life is creating a lot of change and tension. It has a lot to do with your values, with choosing, with shared resources, with your vision for what you're here for, what is your purpose, potentially connected to family and especially the father. But the dynamic can be any family member. And especially when Mars is in the 3rd house, it can represent your extended family and meaning cousins, uncles, aunts, and things like that, but also your neighborhood, the people around you, your local space. And Mars is going to spend quite some time in your 3rd house. And just now, as it's backing up in January, as of the 6th of January, it's going to back up into your 2nd house, where it was in September and October. So you're working through this dynamic of the 2nd and 3rd house opposing the 8th and the 9th house. So there's something here that might reflect your income or the things that you value, and including whether or not you get support from your family. Spoiler alert, it looks like it's you doing the supporting, or that there's some kind of tension around money and support coming from the family. When Mars is going through the 3rd house, it's extremely helpful and dynamic. So that's also a big part of this year. Up until the 6th of January, it's starting the year with that. But then from the 18th of April until the 20th or so of June, you have Mars going back into your 3rd house. So you'll have a lot of time. So those several weeks there between April and June, where Mars is going to energize your 3rd house and it's ruling your 11th house, where at the moment of that opposition on the 3rd, it's trining the North Node that it's been ruling for the past 18 months. So a lot of this has to do with your vision of the future, but also can entail something to do with what you gain from employment or gain from the work that you do, especially if you're an entrepreneur, or gain from random events, random people, from good fortune. Now, the other house that Mars rules is your 6th house of work. So there is quite a big story here about finances and work and how that's all going. And the good news is that once Jupiter moves into your 2nd house, where it's exalted, where it loves to be from the 9th of June all the way through till the end of June 2026, you're going to have a lot more support around finances. And Jupiter will be exalted in a trine ruling your 10th house, where it's ruling the North Node and all of the planets that will be passing through quite a lot of 2025 in Pisces. And we'll talk about that in a moment because it's a really peak area of your chart in this year. So career advances, your social advances, something that you're picking up in terms of your values or the way that you earn money, and perhaps a change of job as well as you go through the year. I would need to see your natal chart to know that for sure. But this is already, you're starting the year off with this really extraordinary energy of a change and an impulse for change that is really quite strong. Now, if there is something here in terms of your vision for your future or your sense of why you're here, what is life all about? Why? The big why, that's a Jupiter in Gemini kind of question is the kind of constant why. This is a year where you're going to start to have a sense of what that really represents for you. What is my why? What do I feel like I am contributing or not? Later in the year, the nodal axis will be squaring Jupiter, and that will happen during the eclipses of September and later on in the year. And when the nodal axis square Jupiter in your first house, Jupiter will be going direct at that point. Then you're going to, oh, sorry, it's not going to be September. It's going to be in the spring, meaning I think it's May. But anyway, I'll check. I'll have a look before I make another mistake. I warned you, right? I warned you at the beginning. So the Jupiter squaring the nodes, especially because it's ruling that north node, is really a decision point between how do I want to show up. Maybe the question, especially because the South Node is in the home, the house of home, and what makes me feel secure, and around your family of origin and your family that you're creating, and also the property or housing or any kind of home related topics, psychological, emotional foundation of life. So that's the tension there between me, how I want to show up, and growing into this vision for my outer worldly life, my new status, my new role in the world. Now, when Jupiter is squaring the nodes like that, especially as it's ruling the North Node, Jupiter represents wisdom, and it represents the distinction of, making that discernment between what is right and wrong for me, what is the choice that is appropriate for me. And that tension there in a square, it really can be, the question can really be like understanding that this world is full of givers and takers, and you can kind of decide which side of that you are on. Do you want to be a giver or do you want to be a taker? And when you start to understand the role that you're going to take on, especially as Uranus moves into your first house and Pluto already being in your ninth house since the 19th of November, and you're stuck with it for 20 years, there's a big change in the way that you show up in terms of your faith and your beliefs and your sense of purpose and your maybe even your political or philosophical ideology. And so you may have been in the past a little frivolous or a little bit sort of happy-go-lucky, and you start to realize, I have a lot to share. I have a lot that I want to contribute. And this is the year that you're going to be able to apply that. So we'll see that as we go through the rest of the year. So we're only on the 3rd of January, and we've already covered quite a lot, but it gives you a bit of the thematics for the year ahead. Now, Saturn is still in your 10th house, and Saturn in the 10th house has been having you reflect since March 2023. Reflect on your career, reflect on your sense of responsibility, perhaps as a parent or with regards to your parents, maybe having to take extra responsibility for your parents or for a managerial role or some kind of professional role that you need to take responsibility for. So that's quite a big deal. Saturn only comes around only every 29 years or so. And this would have last happened in 1995 and 1996. So where we're heading through 2025 is going to resonate to a certain extent with that Saturn passage through Pisces in the mid 1990s. And if you're as old as I am, that would have been in the mid 1960s, 65, 66, and on the margins of that. If you were born in early 66, February, March, you also have that Saturn square, the Jupiter square Saturn that is coming from the same configuration that we have now, Jupiter in Gemini squaring Saturn in Pisces. So join the club. Anyway, the point being that this is a test of your vision for yourself, Gemini. If you're a Gemini rising, particularly, it's going to affect much of your role in life. If it's your sun, then you might notice that in your duties and responsibilities around your career, around the way that you need to take responsibility for something in your life, you have to step up a little bit. You have to become a recognized authority in something and take a little bit more seriously what you do out in the world. If it's your moon, this might have to do with your parents. This might be something that is more of an internalized sense of taking responsibility for this Piscean area of your life, becoming maybe more mature and having a stronger sense of what is possible for you, how you can reach out into your life. So that's a really interesting year ahead already up until June. Having that Jupiter ruling the 10th house all of this year, but from your first house particularly, is going to implicate you really directly in everything that's happening in the world outside your front door. So quite a big year of growth for you. I want to come back to this Mars because Mars, as I mentioned, is going back and forth between your second and your third house. And the dates for that are Mars retrograding on December the 6th of 2024. So it retrogrades at 6 degrees from your third house and slowly, slowly, painfully slowly moves back into your second. So it in September, from the 4th of September through the 6th of December, Mars was already in your second house. So you know this feeling, it's not new. But as Mars is now backing up from the third house, you have new information. You have a new sense of what you might need to develop in terms of skills, or in terms of how you are needing to learn something that will support your work. This can be creative. Third house is very helpful, practical skills like playing a musical instrument, learning a language, learning how to drive a car. It's all of those different aspects of practical engagement, practical goals in your everyday life. And they can also contribute to your commercial enterprises. So Mars going through the third house is all kinds of contractual engagements around business, exchanges of all kinds, marketplaces of all kinds. And since the Node is still in the 11th house and trined by that Mars in your third at the beginning of the year and ruled by that Mars in your third, there may just be something about marketplaces or the internet, or you are, third house would be, for example, establishing a website or some form of a blog or some means of connecting and communicating with people. And this is something that you may have contemplated and then thought, not so sure. And then you're moving back away from that. And that's part of the dynamic here in the opposition with Pluto. The third opposition, which will happen in April, will at the 3 degree point will probably answer these questions, these wonder, the wonder of what should I be doing? How should I be doing it? Now, the third house also represents siblings, extended family, as I said, but language as well, how you communicate, the way that you express yourself. And it can be a little bit bossy, a little bit gossipy, um, a little wee bit sharp, let's say, Gemini, with Mars in the third house. So you might end up having to backpedal after having arguments or discussions or difficulties with people, potentially around this opposition time between the Mars Pluto opposition, particularly as Mars is trining that North Node. Now, the one challenge with Mars in Leo, much like Mercury in Leo, is that it doesn't quickly recognize when it's wrong. There's a bit of stubbornness. And so you might be the one digging in your heels. So double check that. It may not be the other party that is the challenge here. So just notice that um, and question how that might need to resolve itself. Now, there's an interesting rectangle here. You might notice that. That's called a mystical rectangle, and it involves the nodal axis as well as that Mars and Pluto square. So again, this is a really impactful energy for change, for something positive. It's two trines and two sextiles with an opposition. So while there's something really helpful, there's also with two oppositions crossing, two sextiles and two trines, which you can see by the blue, and then the oppositions are the red. So the tension is relieved, let's say, by the trines. And so there's something here that is about transforming and change that is helpful, constructive, and necessary, and especially contributing to your evolution. And again, that's coming from your third house. The fifth house, which is about your creative self-expression, love, and your overall sense of what makes you happy, doing the things that make you happy, children as well, where the South Node has been now for a year and a half. And then, of course, Pluto in the ninth, showing you kind of where you want to be and how you want to be that for the next 20 years, what you believe in, what you have faith in. And the North Node in the 11th, kind of wrapping up this sense of what do I see for my future? So the choices that you're getting this energy from in terms of the third house Mars, which is really good Mars, by the way. Mars loves being in the third house because it's all about action and doing stuff and being busy and using willpower, which is another third house word. Those choices may have seemed logical at one point, and then there's a challenge, perhaps by that Pluto, or there's a challenge that's internal. It might be unconscious, or it might be something that is a little bit like a fear that Pluto might be exposing, and a kind of a feeling of, do I dare? Is this the right thing? Now, Jupiter is still retrograde at the beginning of the year. Mars is retrograde, and it's all change over the next few weeks. So don't worry if this is still not very clear to you. It's all going to sort itself out in the wash as the weeks go by, and you'll see how that progresses from one thing to another. So the other big transit is Venus going into your 10th house. Venus is exalted in your 10th house, and that starts also on the 3rd. As I mentioned, that Mars-Pluto opposition is coming along with that Venus. And this is also very constructive energy, very supportive for you. It's going to bring you some real helpful cooperation. And if you're male, it might even bring you a relationship through work. Venus is exalted in Pisces, so she does really well. Gives it depends on your natal Venus how that all pans out. But there's something here that's quite constructive when Venus is in the 10th house. Usually, things that need to be negotiated or things that need to be done with others are handled really, really well. And especially if, as Saturn has been there, this Venus will come and just kind of smooth things out a wee bit as we grow into 2025. Venus will be there for quite some time. So Venus is actually retrograding this year. She didn't retrograde in 2024, and she retrogrades in February of 2025. So she's going to, let me just check this. Sorry, mid-March, the 2nd of March. It's even my birthday. I don't know how I forgot that. So Venus goes into Pisces on the 3rd of January. She goes into Aries on the 4th of February, and we're going to look at a chart that's close to that time, which is a fabulous chart, and I'll show you that in a minute. Also in your 10th house, really big year for your 10th house. Lots of stuff that you're engaging with in terms of your ambition and drive and the worldly life that you want to lead outside your front door. Um, and so she's then entering into your 11th house, Aries. And when she does that, by that time, we've already got the North Node in the 10th house. Okay, so I'm going to maybe go forward so we can actually visualize that and see her in action. Venus is coming up to the 4th. There we go. And we'll skip back and forth as we go, as we look at all those things. So now we've got the North Node in your 9th house, Venus in your 10th house. Sorry, wrong. North Node in your 10th house, Venus in your 11th house. I'm looking at Cancer here, so hang on a wee moment. There we go, back again. All right, so we got Venus in your 11th house, North Node in your 10th, still with Neptune and Saturn. And this is now the 4th of February. And then she's going to continue into the 9th, 10th degree. So it's actually 10 degrees and 50 minutes. But she's going so slowly that it takes her a month to get there. So she's only going in 1 month's time, because Venus is slowing down to retrograde, she's only going to make it into the first decan of Aries. And this puts it in a sextile for a very, very long time. She's in a sextile to your first house. Really, really helpful, very cooperative. Again, it depends on your natal Venus, but it's generally really favorable to you. And it means that you're also going to get lots of benefits and luck and favors coming from friends, coming from a vision for your future, coming from pure dumb luck, because Venus also rules your house of luck, the 5th house. And your ruler, Mercury, is also in the 9th house at this time. And that's also a lucky house. So there's a lot of really good fortune. If you step up, you show yourself to be this person that you know you can be in your sort of highest vision for your life. And Venus will help you with that. Now, she's going to get, like I said, to 10 degrees by the 2nd of March. There we go. Let's keep going. I'm going to just shift her a month now. So Venus is at 10 degrees now. Oops, we're at the 4th. Let's go backwards. And then we got this pesky change of ascendant as well. So I'm going to keep swapping back and forth because I'm just trying to keep you on the ascendant so we can visualize your chart. Okay, so forget the timings. Forget the timings. You can look at an ephemeris for all of that. I'm giving you the broad strokes here of what is important for you to remember. So Venus is lingering here in your 11th house on the 2nd. I just noticed that also that represents a conjunction on the same day that she's going to be stationing. She's conjoining the moon, which is actually a very interesting dynamic. Again, emphasizing connections, social connections, people that you bond with, people in your life. And this is also, at the same time, Mars is at the degree that it's stationed direct at. So 17 degrees of Cancer is where Mars stationed direct. And I think that was the 24th of February. So you see how slowly these planets are going. So on the 24th of February, which is fully like, what is that? 9 days before, 24th, 20, or yeah, let's say a week plus before. It's taken a week for Mars to just turn around at 17 degrees, and it's still at 17 degrees. So you see how slowly these things are. There's a broad square happening there. There's an actual square happening there, which means that there's a mutual exchange on that 2nd of March. I'm going to keep that in mind for my return, my solar return. There's a mutual exchange between the moon and Mars at 15 to 17 degrees. So the moon within an hour will be at 17 degrees. And all of this pile up still in the 10th house that Jupiter is ruling from your first house. So this station of Venus can be very helpful. It can also show you where you might need to make some adjustments in terms of your vision for your future or the things that you want to establish with friends and groups and cooperative ventures that you might have, political groups or social groups or spiritual groups even, and also its elder siblings, potentially, if that's something that concerns you. Right. So on the 27th of March, Venus stations direct. And then from the direct station, hang on. Is that right? On the 27th of March, let's keep going because I'm not so sure. I don't trust my notes any longer. Hang on. So we're going to keep going. Venus is now, no, she's re-entering Pisces on the 27th of March. That's what it is. Let's go backwards. She's re-entering Pisces on the 27th of March. Let me correct myself here so I don't keep making the same mistake. So enters Pisces. I had said it in symbols, but my brain is frying up now, so I'm not sure what I was saying. Venus retrograding now back into Pisces, 27th of March. And then she continues her little journey all the way through till 25 degrees. She's going to station, sorry, where does Venus get to? 24 degrees. She's stationing with Saturn, conjoining Saturn, who is at 25 degrees. And that will be on the 13th of April. There's a test after this, so I hope you're taking all the notes. So this is going to be where Venus and Saturn come together again, because she already had this connection with Saturn in your 10th house back in January. So there's a lot of consolidation, a lot of feelings of let's make this happen, let's make this lasting. This can be the 10th house for you. Gemini can also represent marriage. We're going to go backwards so you can come back on the, there we go. You're again, Gemini on the ascendant shows Venus up in your 10th house with Saturn. Mercury, your ruler, is with the North Node at this point. Now it's direct. So I didn't talk about the Mercury retrograde. We don't have time to talk about all the Mercury retrogrades. But in this particular instance, it's very interesting, and we'll follow up on that when we look at the eclipses of March. Okay, so I just, otherwise it's too much bouncing around. So we're just going to look at the Mercury retrograde, your ruler retrograde in March at the eclipses. Finally, that Venus is going to carry on. And we're just going to watch her now go back into Aries. And Venus has to do, once again, the conjunction with the North Node, conjunction with Saturn, to clear back into Aries. And that will happen when she comes, and another conjunction with Neptune, which we'll look at in a moment. And then she carries on through all of April. and into, sorry, all of May rather, and into the 6th of June. She's in your 10th house. All right, this is absolutely brilliant. The 6th of June, let me go, mm, mm, mm. Sorry, backwards. I just want to put you back on the ascendant so we know we're still talking about Gemini. There we are. So Venus is now in Taurus, which she rules in your 12th house, and that's through June. And at that point, when Venus has entered into, on the 6th of June, she enters into your 12th house. On the 9th of June, Jupiter leaves your sign. So let's look at that chart. I'm just bouncing around a wee bit, but I'm trying to be sequential, but honestly, it's really hard when you're pulling a whole year together. So here we have Jupiter ingressing into Cancer, and I'm just going to try and move it forward so that once again we have Gemini on the ascendant. All right, so that's not the correct time, but it is the day. The 10th of June is when Jupiter moves in. So it's actually the 9th to the 10th universal time. Remember, all of these times that I'm giving you are universal time, which roughly equates with the time in London. Um, so now look at what's going on here. The Jupiter-Saturn square that was happening in your first house to your 10th house is now happening in your second house. And on the day that Jupiter ingresses, which is just, remember, 3 days after Venus ingresses into her favorite sign, her sign, Taurus, in your 12th house, you have Jupiter conjoining Mercury, your ruler, and it's in a square with Neptune and Saturn. So all of those squares that we had between Jupiter in your first house and Saturn in the 10th house were when Jupiter was not in great dignity and it was alone battling with Saturn. And now Jupiter is in fantastic dignity and Saturn is not in good dignity. So Jupiter has a lot of power, a lot of strength in this square. And that means that it's starting to give you a clarity of response based on the tension that has been building. This square between Jupiter and Saturn, which you may have seen in a video that I did about that already a few months ago, uh, expressing what that symbolism is between the Jupiter and Saturn square. It started out at the winter solstice or the solstice of December 2020. So 21st of December 2020, we had Saturn and Jupiter conjoining at the 0 degree point of Aquarius, which for you is your ninth house. And that starts a 20-year cycle. It's known as the Great Conjunction. And before we knew about the outer planets, that's how we used to time. That's how they used to time bigger moments in time. Those were the sort of era shifts, the 20-year chunks of time. And now that we have the outer planets, we tend to mark time with them as well. So, but we can't forget how important the Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions are because they mark different phases, different eras. And that one set up a kind of a 200-year cycle of the air conjunctions, where now from that point on, Jupiter and Saturn will be meeting in air signs. That puts you next, by the way. So air, you're an air sign, and Aquarius is an air sign, and then Libra is the other air sign. That becomes quite significant because this is a lot to do with our new era of communication and rapid change and social mobility, social change, financial mobility, lots of all the different exchanges that come through the air element. And now, so this square feels very different to the previous squares where Jupiter was not terribly happy, a wee bit scattered, trying to do too much, and Saturn was just like, would you just please stop? Jupiter was ruling Saturn, so strong enough, but from a weak place. A little bit distracted, let's say. Jupiter in Gemini gets distracted. It's like, oh, squirrels. And so this tension now has shifted to a cardinal energy where there's a dynamism for a new beginning. And that's where we leave off this square. That's the end of the square. And we won't be getting any more of this tension between Saturn and Jupiter because now Jupiter is moving along quite quickly. And then Saturn will retrograde back into Pisces. And because Jupiter will be moving away quite quickly, they don't come back into the square. Um, so the next big dynamic between them will be a trine, a much more favorable kind of energy. But that's not for 2025. So we leave that for now. Why did I want to tell you about that? Yes, so Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And it's also, of course, ruling your 10th house, and it rules your seventh house of partnerships and important relationships, and also clients, for that matter, or the people who look at you, the audience. And when Jupiter moves into the second house, it's very favorable for finances. So it can bring you a lot of opportunities, especially because it's ingressed with your ruler. So Gemini, this is really, really interesting for great opportunities, and especially through creative things. Because you're looking at a Mercury here in a square to Neptune, that can bring a lot of creativity. Now, the one thing to be careful of is that Jupiter in the second house can also be that there's a lot of money spent, for example. Now, this may not be a bad thing if you are thinking of investing, for example. The one thing is that Venus rules your fifth house of investment, gambling, risk taking, and she's in the 12th house of loss, although she's strong, so she might be quite stable. It's a fixed sign, it's Taurus. But just keep that in mind. So this may not be the prime moment to be taking big risks, but you'll be feeling like you're ready to take big risks because you've got that feeling of the pressure is off. And so carry on, because you do have a lot of support for big time shifts and a lot of benefit around finances. I would have to see your natal chart, so you don't come back and tell me that you lost a ton of money when I told you that it might be good financially. So you've got Mars in a square to Uranus. And Mars squaring Uranus at this time is the end of the journey of Mars going through your third house. So Mars is soon, within a week or so after this, going to be leaving your third and going into your fourth house. That puts Mars in a tension with this Uranian energy of rapid change. A month from this point, so on the 7th of July, Uranus moves into your first house. And as Uranus moves into your first house, now that's worth having a look at on its own. Hang on. Da, 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 Uranus in Gemini. And now we're going to have to move this so we get you back. So I'm going to shift it all the way around. So this is not the timing, it's just I want Uranus in your first house. Okay, so we can get the visual. So now we have Uranus. It is the 7th of July, not the 8th of July, but you get the picture. So Uranus moves into your first house with Venus. So again, there's a nice, again, symbolism of a new start around money and something dynamic happening. It's also forming a trine with Pluto, which happens much of 2025. Now, by degree, it's been trining Pluto even since the end of 2024. But this is really significant because we have a lot of support now from the trine. Pluto-Venus trine, again, can be big money. It can be really helpful around money. It can be big love because Venus rules your house of love. It can be great for your kids or good fortune around having a family, having children, second marriage, for example, or issues around your father that can be resolved in a helpful way. And there's this, not only is the trine there between Pluto and Uranus and Venus, but also there are these sextiles built in to the middle of that. So there's something really favorable happening here. This is a mini grand trine that is really supportive energy for personal growth, for change, and bringing some kind of dynamic, fluid support to a long-term picture of change. So we have Saturn and Neptune still conjoined, and that's forming the sextile here. And then we've got Saturn, Neptune with Pluto in the ninth house. Now, I haven't expressed what Saturn, Neptune means yet, so let's do that now, okay? And that means we have to go backwards in time, and we're going to go till the end of March. We're going to do the eclipses last because it's so hard to make sense of how to do this. I've done it in a different order in each video because I find it's really hard to make sense chronologically. I prefer to work thematically because it's too confusing for me. So we've got we've got Neptune moving into Aries. Now, again, I'm going to just move the chart so that we can have you on the first house. So no, that's not going to work. So we have to move all the way around. And we're going to put Gemini again on the first house so we can see this in action. So we have Uranus. Did the wrong way, didn't I? Oy, oy, oy. What am I doing here? No, you're sorry, we're not doing Uranus. We're doing Neptune. That see little brain fart there, Gemini. That's the Jupiter in Gemini squaring Saturn coming out. You see, this is my life, and you only had to live it for a year. So here we have Neptune now moving into Aries. And Neptune in Aries in your 11th house is highlighting an energy that has been very strong all through 2025 because that's where the North Node was at the beginning of the year. That's where the challenge or the movement, let's say, around Venus and Neptune and the North Node had been at the end of January. Oh, we didn't even look at that. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And so this is now a new shift in terms of your vision, a new dream, quite literally, with Neptune in the 11th house, a new sense of what my future holds for me, but also who are my people? Who do I want to spend time with? And this is changing based on what is already changing because Pluto has been in the ninth house, changing your sense of what do I have faith in? What is my role in this lifetime? What is life? What is this human thing? What is it to exist and be of service to anyone? So all of these bigger questions, Pluto is going to really transform your sense of spiritual, um, let's say your relationship to spirit, your relationship to God, your relationship to your life philosophy, potentially also including your father, your relationship to your father. Now, as Neptune moves through there, and by the way, that's what Uranus has been doing also since May 2018. It's been transforming your more hidden self, your maybe internal sense of your spiritual life or your relationship to ancestors or your relationship to what is foreign, because Pluto in the ninth and Uranus in the 12th can also have you more engaged in foreign lands and foreign people, foreign clients potentially as well, especially if you work for yourself. Where am I going with all this? So Neptune back in the 11th house. So Neptune is going to be in your 11th house for about 14 years, but it will actually go zigzagging in and out of your 10th house. So it's going to try and clarify what that 10th house journey was for you since March of 2011. At the very tail end of 2025, Neptune goes back. So it's actually the 22nd of October, 2025, Neptune will return to your 10th house. But basically from the 30th of April until the 22nd of October, it's there at the early couple of degrees of Aries. Then when it does go back into your 10th house, that will be the last journey into your 10th house. It spends the next 3 months there until the 26th of January. And yeah, 26th of January, 2026. And then it will move back into Aries for good from the 26th of January until the 21st of May, 2038. I can't even get my head around the fact that we're talking about 2038, but there we are. And Pluto will be in your ninth until 2043 and 2044. So, I mean, geez. All right. So, where are we going next? So I want to keep exploring this first degree of Aries, and then we're going to go backtracking again because I can't do this in any kind of linear way. Well, we've got Neptune in the 11th house. Mars is still slogging it out in Cancer, where it's not been very comfortable, and it's going to be leaving Cancer on the, hang on, now I forgot my brain is, yeah, leaving Cancer on the 18th of April. So it has another 3 weeks to go, basically, as Neptune goes in. And that means that Mars is ruling Neptune from a place of weakness. It's not really ideal. So there can be some confusion for you. And this can be around money. Beware, because the 11th house is the house of gains and money that you might receive in all kinds of different ways. And Mars is in the house of income and investment and what supports you, potentially around family. This would not be a good time, for example, to loan money to family. Mars rules your house of obstacles and challenges, the sixth house of challenging people in your life, difficulties or issues around work. Another, like, for example, if you're toying with the idea or if you've got yourself involved in one of these multi-level marketing things, these pyramid schemes, this would be a really not a good idea at this time because you're really not seeing clearly what the whole thing is. Those are dangerous traps and quite unethical. Very few people actually emerge with any sort of wealth from those enterprises. So this would be one example of being taken advantage of, or having a disappointment around friendship could be another way that that could look like somebody might let you down. Don't worry, it's not permanent. It's something that is one potential of many. It really requires seeing your natal chart, how that might pan out for you. But it's just, I have to mention it just because it's possibly one of the themes that you're going to be encountering. And so we're looking really at a very dynamic 11th house that's coming forward also for a very long period of time. Also because later we get Saturn. That's on the 25th of May now. We get Saturn here. I'm sorry, we're going to go forward. So we get you on the ascendant. Now Saturn is in your 11th house. We've kind of cleared out your 10th house, except that the eclipses still remain. That's for a year and a half, basically, from the 10th of January um, until July of 2020, the end of July 2026, or even beginning of August, I think, 2026. You've got the North Node constantly putting your attention at your career. So don't worry, it's not going anywhere. It's just that it's less intense at this point. Now the question is more about the future or about friendships or about people that you spend time with on a project that you feel you have a common purpose with. And so this is a really interesting dynamic because what feels a little bit kind of wobbly when Neptune moves in there, Saturn comes in and stabilizes. Saturn comes in and says, look, this is the deal. This is how things are, and we need to explore this. Now, Saturn is not in good dignity in Aries. Saturn is considered to be in its fall in Aries because it rules Libra. So sorry, it's in detriment, wrong term. So the exaltation, no, it was in fall. It's exalted in Libra, not ruling Libra. It's exalted in Libra. It's in its fall in Aries. That means that it's not happy because there's a doubt around oneself. There's a limitation or a doubt in terms of your own personal action. And this is one of the messages of Saturn for the next 2.5 years or so. As Saturn goes through your 11th house, you're going to be learning to trust friends. You're going to be learning to trust your instincts, learning to trust your vision of your future, learning to trust your dreams. Now, Saturn squaring Jupiter may have burned you a little bit in terms of Jupiter being in your first house, all kinds of rah, rah, let's go, and Saturn in the 10th house saying, you can't do that. Have you thought about that? You can't do this. Or some person representing Saturn, a boss, some authority figure, the government, whatever, stopping you from doing what it is that you wanted to do. Now, as Saturn moves into Aries, you're going to have to be grappling with your own authority, grappling with issues around social connections, society in general. I think it's going to be supported. It just may be that there's an adjustment required as Saturn with Neptune is in a sextile to Pluto. So there's big change, but it's constructive. It's really helpful. And at the time that Saturn moves into Aries, Pluto is also trining the sun, which is your sun. It's moving into Gemini. And so if you're born in the first, let's say 6, 7 days of Gemini, maybe even up to 8 days of Gemini, meaning sort of the last week of May, basically, or the last, let's say from the 20th of May until the 28th or so of May, this is very positive for you. It's going to be a really interesting, supportive trine from Pluto. And now, because Pluto is in an air sign, every time the sun comes around to Gemini, you're always going to get a trine at some point from Pluto, which is very constructive, very supportive for your dynamic growth, for your personal growth. Mars is still chugging along in your third house at this point. And remember, Mars is ruling now Saturn and Neptune. And this time, Venus has finally moved along. She doesn't leave your 11th house until the 6th of June. So you've got all this activity going on in terms of your sense of your vision. What's my vision for my life? Who are the people I want to do that with? How do I benefit from all of these things? Now, Saturn might slow that down a wee bit, but you've got a glimpse into the future. You've got a glimpse into all of that. At this particular point, Venus is trining Mars. Mars is ruling Venus, so that's extremely supportive. It's really helpful, very dynamic, but in a way that Mars in the third house is all about your willpower and what you want and how you want to achieve things. And Venus is going to find the friends and the people that you can hang out with and grow with to help achieve those things. And just the caveat about the investing and exchanging money with friends, and potentially also the potential for being disappointed either in a dream or a friendship, or a social group or a political group or a spiritual group. But it's part of the Pluto moving through your ninth house, so kind of seeing your vision for your life in a new way. So you're basing yourself on a completely different philosophy of life from this trajectory. This trajectory rather of Pluto moving through the ninth house is going to completely change all of that. So I'm going to finish up now. Before we move on to the eclipses, I'm going to finish up with the bigger outer moving planets as Uranus goes into your house. Oh, we did that, did we? Yes, we did that. You see, I'm all over the shop. When Uranus moves in to your first house, this is not you on the ascendant, but I'm going to keep it here just to show you that not only is it with Venus, not only is it sextiling Neptune and Saturn, which is kind of a very creative, impulsive, sort of new, fresh sense of what is possible for you, but it also is in opposition to the moon. And so there may be something that comes through a partner or a relationship or some kind of a business obligation or business something or other, or clients that is actually showing you where things need to change. Now, it's not necessarily difficult. It's an opposition to the moon. It's very fleeting, but it might just show you, it'll highlight something about how you're relating to people, especially in a commercial sense, since Venus in Gemini is very much about commercial stuff. And Uranus in Gemini is going to change your way of operating in every dimension, let's say. Jupiter is ruling that moon from Cancer, so it's a really strong, helpful Jupiter. So it doesn't seem to be terribly problematic because Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and remember, it's still ruling your 10th house where the North Node is. Remember, don't look at this rising sign. We're just recalling the bigger transit of Uranus. Right. Now I want to show you one thing before we get to the actual eclipses. I just want to show you something of a really interesting dynamic. I'm going to go backwards in time so that we can once again get Gemini on the ascendant. So on the 1st of February, but you really want to give this kind of the last week of February and the last week of January and the first week of February, we have a really lovely, I think, lovely pile up in your 10th house. And I want you to pay attention to the latter degrees of Pisces. The moon should be there, by the way. So the exact conjunction is later in the day. Remember, we just had to shift the chart to get Gemini and Jupiter in Gemini on your ascendant. So this Jupiter ruled pile up here in Pisces at 28 and 27 degrees of Pisces is really important. That degree keeps getting affected again and again and again, just like the 0 degree point of Aries keeps getting affected again and again and again. So you're getting a lot of information around your ambition, around your career, around your social status, around how you want to show up in the world, how you want to do that in the future, who you want to do that with. And it's really beneficial because you're representing that. Now you're housing Jupiter. Jupiter is supportive in this role. It's also being trined by the sun at the same time. And your ruler, Uranus, is also in a trine broadly to Jupiter. So this is really supportive. And all of that, they've just had a little conference with Pluto as the sun enters into Aquarius at, I think it's like the 19th, 20th of January, and that sun meets Pluto on the 20th, 21st, and then Mercury meets Pluto, and then they keep moving along into the trine with now retrograde Jupiter. Now, remember that square between Jupiter and Saturn is done. We're done with that now in these two signs. Remember, there's another one coming in the cardinal signs between Saturn in the 0 degree point. Again, this is very important. Saturn at 0 degrees of Aries and Jupiter at another cardinal point, another important critical degree, the 0 degree point of the cardinal signs is considered to be always affecting the Aries point, which is like a really big new beginning, which kind of conjoins what is collective with our personal desire or our personal changes, and vice versa. Now, I hope I haven't confused you entirely, but what I'm looking at here is the 1st of February. We've got this very big conjunction here. I want you to pay attention to what's going on in your life around that last week of January and the first week of February, because this particular degree point is coming again and again and again, and will be affected particularly by the eclipses. Now, we're going to have a look at how that all comes through by looking at the first eclipse of the year, which is March the 14th. There we are. So it's a Virgo total lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo. And I'm just going to back up the chart once again so that we can put you on, oopsie, sorry, so that we can put you on the first house. All right. So that means that the eclipse is happening in your house of home and family. So remember, the nodal shift has happened the 10th, 11th of January. Those nodes are now putting all of your attention into this balance between what makes you happy, what makes you feel secure, what brings you a feeling of inner security that's psychological and emotional, as well as material security. It's an earth house for you, Gemini, so that matters. Your connection with your family and how that's changing, and then how that might be affected by your outer ambitions, your worldly ambitions and or duties, because we've got Saturn there. So what you have to do, not necessarily what you want to do, although there's a lot of reaching into the what do I want to do as well. Now, Saturn is conjoining the sun. So this should actually be at 23 degrees. Remember, I had to move the chart. So the lunar eclipse is actually at 23 degrees, not at 24 degrees. So the lunar eclipse is on the south node in your fourth house, and it concerns Virgo, which is ruled by your ruler. So Gemini and Virgo are both ruled by Mercury. And Mercury is at this 9 degree point where it's just about to station retrograde. So 2 days later, on the 16th of March, your ruler will have its first retrograde station. And the retrogrades in 2025 are all in fire signs. So you'll have one in Aries, one in Leo, one in Sagittarius as the year progresses. But I'm afraid I'm not going to cover those because it's just way too much stuff, Gemini. So it is your ruler, it is important, but it's not the most important thing. When Mercury retrogrades, it's 3 times a year, sometimes 4. And it might concern you depending on your chart, but it's really not the end of the world. So it is for clickbaity YouTube videos, but it's not really in real life. So nonetheless, at this point, we have a Venus, which is now retrograde. She stationed retrograde at 10 degrees, remember, of Aries, which is 2 degrees off where Mercury stations, and which at the end of the month, you're going to see is where the next eclipse is happening. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are all tied in together through the whole month of March, which tie back into what was going on at the end of January and the beginning of February. Now, we have the Sun and Saturn conjunction in your 10th house, asking you to take responsibility for something, but that requires also an adaptation because it's in a sextile to Uranus in Taurus. And the adaptation might be something that you realize that you need to let go of or change based on your behavior or preferences or things that may have not been really helpful to you. Or it can also be that you're just realizing different aspects of yourself unconsciously that may have either been holding you back or causing some disruption in your life that you really need to work through. Definitely want to consciously work through that before July, before Uranus moves into your first house. And The other aspect of this is, of course, there's still this ongoing 27, 28, 29 degree story between Neptune and the North Node. Neptune doesn't leave your 10th house until after the next eclipse, the day after the next eclipse. So a really big opportunity here to understand yourself profoundly. There's a trine between this moon and Uranus, where there's this, of course, because there's the Sun Moon opposition is what gives us a full moon. And since there's a sextile here to Uranus from the sun, there is also a trine from the moon to Uranus. So your career, your emotional nature, your household, literally the place of living, where do I live? How do I want to live? Might be changing. And that's also true because we have Mars in Cancer that has something to do with family and your values and what is coming between you and the people who support you or the things that support you that might require change. That is perhaps part of the reason where you feel like now everything has to be different. Something is new. This is part of the changing your sense of who's around me, what is my vision for my life. And Venus, of course, rules the house of children, and she is ruling your 12th house, which represents foreign lands and potentially loss as well. Not to say you're going to lose a child, that's not what I mean. I'm just saying that there is this story of something that's changing quite dramatically. Now, another classical example of this would be your children are leaving home, and now you got to figure out what to do with yourself, or you've got some kind of expenses around that, or you've got to set them up in a new home, or whatever. But this is changing the way that you show up in the world based on something that's changing around the foundation of your life that you've become aware of. All right. So this is the first eclipse of the year, and the second eclipse of the year is happening on the 29th of March. And this actually will, and here we're going to go again to get you back on the pardon me, we have to go this way. How we're gonna have to change the timing of the eclipse just to put Gemini on the ascendant. So the eclipse itself is happening with the sun and the moon conjoining at 9 degrees of Aries. Now, 9 degrees of Aries, again, remember, is quite impactful because that's where we had Venus retrograding within a degree, and that's why we had Mercury retrograding within 2 degrees just a couple of weeks before. So this is a big month for this combination here to culminate, let's say, all of the things that you've been discovering from January, February, March, and now by the end of March, you're wrapping up not just the 3 or 4 months of change that we've been noticing in the 10th and 11th house for you, but you're wrapping up a 2 year cycle because the eclipse cycle is now it's moving between where the North Node is in Pisces and where the actual eclipse is happening. This new moon is happening in Aries. It's not a total solar eclipse, but it's a strong one. And the solar eclipse brings a lot of change. And again, we're looking at a dynamism with regards to your future. On October the 2nd, rather, of 2024, you had a 10-degree eclipse in your fifth house, which represents love and children and your creative expression um, in Libra. And so here we have an opposite new moon, and that was a new moon in Libra. Now we have a new moon in Aries, 1 degree off that. And so there's an answer. It's like the sun, there's a kind of a dynamic here between the 2nd of October and this end of March. So we're still working with now Mars still being the ruler. Mars is in Cancer, still lumbering along in Cancer in your second house. And there's a kind of a mutual, what is known as a mutual generosity between Mars and the moon. There's no exact alignment here. There's no aspect that we can describe here. And so we call it a mutual generosity rather than a mutual exchange, but doesn't mean that they're not still helpful to each other. So the moon is not super comfortable in Aries. Mars is not terribly comfortable in Cancer, but they help each other out here. So between the house of gains, the house of your vision, the house of income and family, and perhaps the money that you have on hand, there is some kind of support here. And yet Venus and your ruler, Mercury, are both retrograde. And again, we have this famous 29, 28, 27 degree point very, very strongly impacted because Venus is coming back for her second pass over the North Node and going back towards Saturn, where she's also been conjoined so many times now by Neptune, which is still hanging out there with Mercury. Remember that 0 degree point, very significant. Your ruler is retrograde at this eclipse at the end of March at the Aries point, and that Aries point comes back again and again in different ways this year by the ingress of Neptune, by the movement of the North Node at the beginning of the year, January, by the ingress of Saturn. You've got ingress of Neptune, Venus, um, Mercury, Saturn, and of course the Sun as well around the 21st of March. So all of these ingresses are hitting these sensitive points that later, as we saw earlier, just to confuse you, you have then Saturn and then the square at another cardinal point at 0 degrees, where Jupiter will be 0 degrees of Cancer. So try and notice what's going on around these dates because they're going to call each other in, and there's going to be something that is resonating with all of these experiences that are about very new beginnings and lots of endings that have to do with your social status and how you show up in the context of friends and groups of people. Now, if we just go a little bit ahead, if we go forward in time, hang on, let's try and do this. How do we do this? No, we're going. I did show you the Neptune, didn't I? One last time. I'm just gonna. Oh no, we did that. We did that conclusively. I think we don't need to go back to the Neptune. Remember, that's the next day. Neptune will be exactly where Mercury is, and they kind of meet each other as they're going backwards. Mercury's going backwards into Pisces. Now we're going to go to finish up with the last two eclipses of the year. The first one being in September. And that is the Pisces lunar total eclipse. And we're going to go forward here just again to put you back on the ascendant so we can see this, what this looks like for you. That means that the eclipse is actually there in mid Pisces. It's not as far along as the moon is. It's going to be at 15 degrees of Pisces with your ruler and the ruler of the sun at that time. And so the moon itself is with the North Node. This is really powerful when the moon is with the North Node. It's something that is, there's something really big shifting your attitude, your vision for yourself. Remember now you've still got this big shift that's happening here. Uranus in your first house is changing you completely. Talk to your Taurian friends, although probably you'll find it'll be easier for you to adapt than your Taurus friends. But the trine coming from Uranus to Pluto, and then this lunar shift where we have this big awareness of this destination or this ambition or this new role or this new status that you have been acquiring and needing to grapple with. Saturn is still conjoining Neptune, both of which are in a retrograde motion. Neptune is still trining Uranus. That continues for much of 2025, and Saturn is moving out of the trine. So it's a significant shift based on something that you have been mulling over since the end of 2024, but really in earnest at the beginning of 2025 when Venus moved into your 10th house. So you're really up for something very, very significant. The eclipses will make that more dynamic. So Venus is now in the third house in Leo. So there's something here that continues the theme that Mars was developing around local space, around friends and extended family and so on. And you've got Jupiter supporting you even more again in your family house. Jupiter is broadly squaring, or it continues this square through the first half of September, Mars. And Mars is now in your house of love and children and your desire for how you want to show up in how you might show up creatively in your life. And Mars in the fifth can be very helpful in terms of business or restructuring or developing some creative enterprise, which again, Pisces on the 10th makes you really good at. And Venus in the third supports a lot as well, because that can bring some deep creativity, some really interesting creative impulses. Um, Mars rules your sixth house of work, and from the fifth house is not terribly comfortable because Mars in Libra can be either overly accommodating or find that it's very frustrated by the fact that it's difficult to settle on something. And Gemini, we both know that it's difficult for you to make a choice, and especially with Uranus in your first house, you might be finding this difficult to just make a decision. So what I suggest is that with the moon on the North Node, you want to trust your instincts. That moon represents your instincts. It's in a trine to Jupiter that's really, really helping it because it's not only in its point of exaltation in Cancer, it's ruled by that moon, and Jupiter rules the moon itself. So that is definitely a mutual exchange that you can rely on. So there's something about your values, something about perhaps an economic imperative or something that you understand economically, but most especially, what does my intuition tell me about what I should do in this moment? So work with that, get really familiar with what it feels like to be going in the right or wrong direction based on how you feel. So oftentimes you can be a little bit too cerebral and you block your feelings, and then you don't really get the intuitive message that you need to receive. So now we have the Virgo partial eclipse that is happening in the fifth house. Oops, no, in your fourth house. Hang on, we gotta go forward. There we go. In your fourth house at 29 degrees of, again, remember that degree point, really important, 29 degrees of your Mercury ruled friend, Virgo, where Mercury now is in Libra and is in a semi-sextile to Venus, which is in Virgo, and they are exchanging, although in a classical sense, that's technically not true because in the classical astrology, there are no semi-sextiles. I definitely work with them because they tell us something of a discomfort or a need to really accommodate something. It's like when you're standing a little too close in a lift, or when there's somebody driving in your blind spot and you just kind of have to keep checking on them because you're not quite sure what's going on. So there is an adjustment between your fifth house of desire or what it is that you want to express, how you want to, because that's your ruler there, how you want to reach out into your creative self or with your kids, for example, and Venus at home, or in terms of your psychological or your maybe emotional nature, and what you need for that. There's something new there that can also be literally, I'm deciding to move. I need to move. And South Node solar eclipse, I'm now moving. Not that you couldn't have done it before. Now, this is all in opposition to Saturn, and the Saturn opposing this is saying, okay, all the stuff that we've been looking at since January, but also with regards to Neptune, really since the latter months of 2024, and then the North Node was there too. So let's give it from the beginning of 2025 anyway. There's been a lot of information coming through this point that currently we find Saturn at, and equally the same with Neptune, but especially the Saturn, which is very strongly in opposition. Neptune is also opposing, but Saturn really has the upper hand here. And that is going to tell you what is true for you because Saturn is about really getting to the essence of what you need to take action on, how you need to step up. If you weren't stepping up before, now you got to step up. And this will tell you why there is this feeling of blockage. What is this blockage? And by the time Saturn comes back to this point and clears that 28 degree in a direct motion, which will be later in the year, uh, then you will know it'll be done. And that will be January, so December, January. And by the 20th of February, Saturn and Neptune will be together directly moving into your 11th house at 0 degrees, where Neptune is retrograde right now, and showing you this new thing that's coming up in your vision for your future. So, Gemini, really make the most of this year. It's absolutely amazing. I think there's just endless opportunities for you. And oh yes, yeah, I do have to kind of nod in the direction of the Mars squaring Pluto. It's an out of sign square, and Mars is about to enter into its own sign. So that would be something, again, pesky, something to do with everyday responsibilities, work, potentially health, take care of your health, and anything that might have you overworking, overthinking. That square to Pluto will require an adjustment in terms of how you're showing up around work or around your sense of purpose. But it's a strong Mars, very helpful when it's in the sixth house. You'll get stuff done. Um, Beware of overspending and all as well. So remember that Jupiter in the second, as long as it's got that, as long as Neptune is still a little bit kind of not super clear in the 11th house, beware of overspending or spending on the wrong thing. On Mars, of course, in the fifth with Mercury, your ruler in the fifth can be about investing. So just be careful around investments. Be sure of what you're doing. I'm not a financial astrologer. I'm just saying I'm looking at the chart here, and that's what I would read from it. So have a fabulous year, Gemini. Really make the most of it. It's looking like there's a lot working in your favor. When you have Jupiter in your first house, and then you have Jupiter in your second house, ruling your 10th house, and where we find the eclipses, it's just all systems go. So really enjoy that. And I'll see you in the next video or an upcoming video on my channel. Thanks very much for being here, for all of your support. Take good care. Bye bye.